I arrived at my wife's law firm launch party only to see everyone laughing and pointing. "TESTRUN husband is here." Then my wife slipped me an envelope. "The first case of my firm is our divorce. Sign and go." So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, trip, and pulled my $20 million investment from her firm. Minutes later, my phone blew up with 456 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. Can you believe someone could be so utterly, brutally manipulative? I walked into my wife's law firm opening party, bursting with pride, only to hear whispers and see smirks. Then, she walked right up to me, a cold stranger in a familiar face, and handed me an envelope that shattered my world. "The first job of Hayes Law Group," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, "is handling my divorce from you. Sign these papers and leave. Your job here is done." My job here was done. Oh, she had no idea how right she was, or what kind of job I was about to start doing. Let me take you back, way back, to understand how I even got to that moment. My name's Michael Anderson, and I came into this world on a freezing January morning in Millbrook, Ohio. You know, one of those towns where the factory's smokestacks are the skyline, and most families are just praying to make it to next week. My dad worked at the steel mill, came home with hands black with grime, his back bending a little more every year. My mom cleaned houses for the hill people, the ones with the big columns and the perfectly trimmed hedges. You see, I was the youngest of 3 boys, and I learned early on that money wasn't just paper and coins. It was everything. It decided if you ate name-brand cereal, or the store-brand bag version, if you had new shoes or hand-me-downs with cardboard to cover the holes. Our house, 2 bedrooms, siding that was more rust than paint. Winter winds practically whistled through the windows, and summer, forget it, the upstairs was an oven. The bathroom mirror had a crack that made everyone look a little broken, and our kitchen table wobbled like it was doing a jig. But my parents, despite all that, they taught me something priceless. They taught me dignity isn't about what you own, but how you carry yourself. Respect. You earn that through action, not through circumstances. And if you wanted something bad enough, truly, deeply wanted it, and were willing to work harder than anyone else, you could rewrite your entire story. That stuck with me, deep in my bones. I was just 7 years old when I started what you could generously call my first business. I'd collect bottles and cans from neighbors, from ditches, from restaurant dumpsters. I'd spend whole Saturdays, my small hands sticky with old soda, my shoes soaked from crossing drainage ditches, filling garbage bags with anything that had a 5-cent deposit. I'd drag those bags on my red wagon, the one that squeaked like a tortured mouse, to the recycling center. I'd stand on my tiptoes, pouring cans into the machine, watching that counter tick up, penny by penny. Most kids were playing. I was collecting cans. By the end of that summer, I had saved $83. I kept it in a coffee can under my bed, checking it every night like a dragon guarding its hoard. One week, my dad's hours got cut. We were struggling. My mom cried when I used that money to buy groceries. I pretended not to notice her tears, but something clicked inside me that day. A realization, money wasn't just paper. It was freedom, security, the ability to help the people I loved. And I swore to myself, right then and there, I would never be poor again. I would climb out of that hole life had dug for us. School was a weird mix for me. Numbers? I was a natural. Patterns, solutions. I saw them while other kids were still counting on their fingers. My teachers, they saw I had a mind built for logic. But reading, that was a war. Words would swim on the page, letters flipping around. I wanted to throw books across the room, I swear. It wasn't until 3rd grade that Mrs. Henderson, a truly patient teacher, realized I had dyslexia. She stayed with me after school, 3 days a week, taught me to slow down, to focus, to use colored overlays, to track with my finger, to be patient with myself instead of angry at my own brain. I'd miss the bus, walk 2 miles home in whatever Ohio weather threw at me, but I didn't complain. I knew education was a ladder, and I was going to climb every single rung, even if my hands ached. By 5th grade, I was reading at grade level. By 7th, I was devouring books. Books about business, about success, about people who started with nothing and built empires. Stories about failures becoming stepping stones, setbacks becoming setups for comebacks. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Oprah, Warren Buffett, immigrants who came here with empty pockets and a determination you couldn't measure. Every story fed the fire inside me. The absolute certainty that I wasn't going to live and die in Millbrook. I wasn't going to spend 40 years in a factory. I was destined for more, even if no one else could see it yet. Then I was 13. My dad was at the mill. A machine malfunctioned, crushing 3 fingers on his left hand. The company paid medical bills. Sure, but it wasn't enough for the mortgage, for food, for a family of 5. I watched him try to work with a bandaged hand, wincing with pain. I saw the worry lines deepen around my mom's eyes as she picked up extra houses to clean. And I decided right then, waiting until I was an adult to make real money, that was a luxury my family couldn't afford. So, I started mowing lawns. In that wealthy neighborhood where my mom worked. I'd knock on doors, feeling confident on the outside but shaking inside, offering to mow, edge, trim for less than the big companies, promising quality. Most said no. But this one woman, Mrs. Patterson, she took a chance on me, probably more out of pity. I showed up at 6 a.m. on Saturday with a mower I'd borrowed, and I worked until every blade of grass was perfect, until the edges were razor sharp. Her yard looked like it belonged in a magazine. Mrs. Patterson was so impressed, she told her friends. And they hired me. By the end of that summer, I had 20 regular clients, making more money than a 13-year-old should, enough to help with bills, buy my own school clothes, and start saving again in a new coffee can that was quickly becoming too small for my ambitions. High school brought its own challenges and opportunities, and I tackled both with a focus that made me seem older than my years. The lawn business kept growing, snow removal in winter, gutter cleaning in fall. I built a reputation as the kid who showed up on time, did exactly what he promised, treated every job like it mattered, because to me it did. My grades were solid, not perfect, but good enough. I joined math club, business club, spent lunch talking to teachers about investments, compound interest, the power of starting young. While my classmates were worried about football games and dances, I was devouring financial books, studying entrepreneurs, teaching myself about real estate, stocks, business models. My notebooks were filled with ideas, plans, calculations. My brothers thought I was weird. My classmates thought I was boring. I didn't care. I saw a future they couldn't even imagine. A life where I wasn't trapped by circumstances, where I made the rules instead of following ones set by people who never wanted more than a steady paycheck. I knew I was different. Knew I wanted things other people didn't even know were possible. And instead of trying to fit in, I leaned into that difference. I knew normal people got normal results, and I was aiming for something far beyond normal. The summer before senior year, my lawn business got so big I couldn't handle it all myself. So I hired 2 classmates, paid them fair wages, taught them my standards, told them their work reflected on my reputation, and my reputation was everything. This was my first taste of managing people. I quickly learned leadership wasn't about being bossy, it was about clear communication, setting expectations, providing tools, recognizing good work, correcting poor work without crushing spirits. I was good at it, good at seeing people's strengths, positioning them to succeed. I could inspire others to care about quality, even when I wasn't watching. These skills, they'd serve me far beyond cutting grass and shoveling snow. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved $32,000. My parents thought it was impossible. They'd never had more than a few hundred in savings. My guidance counselor pushed colleges, scholarships, telling me my unique background could open doors. But my path, it wasn't traditional college. For years in classrooms, learning theory. No, thank you. I wanted to be in the real world, building actual businesses, making actual money, while my peers accumulated debt and degrees that might or might not lead to jobs. My parents were disappointed, hoping one of their sons would go to college. But I explained my plan with such clarity, such confidence, that eventually they understood. They saw I had a vision most 18-year-olds couldn't articulate, and they gave me their blessing, even if they didn't fully understand where I was going. My first real business venture started in a rented garage outside Millbrook. It was cramped, smelled like motor oil, and the electrical outlets sparked sometimes. But it was $200 a month, and that's what I could afford. I'd spent months researching, analyzing what people needed, what margins were realistic, what I could start with limited capital. I settled on something almost too simple: furniture flipping. Not fancy antiques, not designer stuff, just regular furniture people were throwing away or selling cheap because it was damaged or outdated. Furniture I could repair, refinish, and sell for a profit. I started driving around on trash days in wealthy neighborhoods, loading dressers, tables, chairs with broken legs or scratched surfaces into a truck I bought for $1,500. It was more rust than metal, but it ran. I taught myself furniture repair through YouTube videos and library books. Stripping old paint, fixing joints, replacing hardware, refinishing wood until it glowed like new. My garage became a workshop filled with sandpaper, stain, clamps with glue. It was trash into treasure, and I worked from early morning until late at night, hands covered in sawdust, lungs full of varnish. Completely focused. The first piece, a dining table I found on the curb. Solid oak, beautiful once, but covered in scratches, water rings, and a wobbly leg. I spent 2 weeks on that table, stripping it, sanding it, repairing the leg, new stain, multiple coats of finish. When I was done, it looked like something from a high-end store, something that should cost thousands. I listed it online for $400, holding my breath. It sold within 6 hours to a young couple furnishing their first house. They were thrilled with the quality and the price. And me, I was thrilled with the profit. Maybe $50 in materials, a lot of sweat, and I turned it into $400. That was the proof of concept. The confirmation. I scaled up immediately. Found more furniture, worked faster, improved my techniques, learned what sold quickly. Within 3 months, I was making more money than most adults in Millbrook. Within 6 months, I hired my first employee, Frank, a retired carpenter. He taught me advanced techniques, helped increase production, treated me with the respect usually reserved for people twice my age. But I wasn't content to just flip furniture forever. I wasn't satisfied with a business that needed my constant physical labor, always limited by my hours. I started thinking about scalability, how to build something that could grow beyond me. The real opportunity, I realized, wasn't doing the work myself, but creating a system where others did it. I hired more people, trained them, set up multiple workstations in a bigger warehouse. An assembly line approach. One person for pickup, another for repairs, another for refinishing, another for photography and listings. And me. I oversaw everything. Quality control. Business side. This shift, from worker to manager, from technician to entrepreneur, it was crucial. It taught me the business owner's job wasn't to do everything, but to build systems and develop people. My highest value wasn't wielding a paintbrush, but making decisions, creating processes, identifying opportunities. The business exploded. We expanded from furniture to appliances, electronics, anything people threw away that could be repaired and resold. By 21, I had 15 employees and was clearing $10,000 a month in profit. Most of it went into savings and investments. I still lived in a small apartment, drove that rusty truck. I understood. Money spent on lifestyle was money that couldn't work for me. It was around this time, during this crazy growth, that I stumbled into the world of real estate investing. One of my employees, Roger, an older guy who did pickup and delivery, mentioned he owned a few rental properties. Said he made decent money without doing much work, just collecting rent, handling occasional maintenance. This fascinated me. Ultimate scalability. Buy something once, and it generates income, month after month, year after year. Building wealth while you sleep. That was the dream. I dove into real estate with the same intensity one brought to everything. Books, podcasts, online forums. I learned about house hacking, the BRRR method, creative financing. All the ways people built wealth through property. I learned that most millionaires made their money through real estate. Tax benefits, appreciation, cash flow, leverage. You could control a $300,000 asset with a $60,000 down payment, have tenants pay off the mortgage, and watch the value climb. The more I learned, the more convinced I became. Real estate was my path to serious wealth. I started saving aggressively for my first investment property, cutting my already minimal expenses even further. Ramen for dinner, canceled cable. Every dollar was sacred. Every dollar was a brick in the empire I was building. My first investment property, a duplex in a working-class neighborhood. It needed serious work, but the price reflected it. $80,000 when similar properties in good condition were $130,000. I put $20,000 down, borrowed the rest, and immediately started renovations. I did most of the work myself, using skills from furniture flipping to repair cabinets, refinish floors. Hired out only the specialized stuff, like plumbing and electrical. I worked on that duplex every evening after managing my furniture business, through weekends and holidays, driven by a vision of what it could become, what it represented for my future. 3 months and $15,000 in materials and labor later, that duplex was transformed. It looked better than it probably had in its 50-year history. Updated kitchens, baths, fresh paint, new carpet, modern fixtures, curb appeal that made it stand out. I rented both units within a week, $800 a side, $1,600 monthly. My mortgage was $600. That left $1,000 a month in cash flow after setting aside for maintenance and vacancies. But the real beauty! It cost me $35,000 all in, and after renovations, it was worth around $130,000. I created $95,000 in equity, on paper, yes, but still. And I still owned the asset, still collected rent, still benefited from appreciation. This experience was transformative. It opened my eyes to the power of leverage, forced appreciation, strategic value-add investing. I immediately started looking for my next property. Over the next 3 years, I bought 7 more properties. Cash flow from the furniture business, equity from previous properties through refinancing, creative financing strategies like seller financing, and private money from investors who wanted better returns than banks. I became known as the young investor who moved fast, closed deals, evaluated properties quickly, made competitive offers, had the capital and the capability to execute renovations efficiently. Each one was a value-add opportunity, something that needed work but had good bones, good location. Each renovation and rental added to my monthly cash flow, my net worth. By the time I was 24, I owned 8 rental properties, worth over $1 million combined, with enough cash flow to cover all my expenses and then some. I had achieved financial independence, the ability to live without depending on active income, the freedom to choose what I did with my time because my assets worked for me instead of me working for survival. But I wasn't content, not satisfied to retire at 24, living modestly off rental income. My vision was bigger than comfort, bigger than security, bigger than the small-town success that would have made my parents proud. I wanted wealth, real wealth, the kind that changes lives, creates opportunities, makes an impact. And I knew that meant continuing to push, continuing to take calculated risks, continuing to build something extraordinary. Then I met Victoria Hayes. It was a rainy Tuesday evening at a coffee shop near the university. Upscale place, exposed brick, baristas who took themselves very seriously. Not my usual spot. Expensive coffee felt like an unnecessary luxury. But I was meeting a potential private lender, a referral, and I arrived 15 minutes early because punctuality is respect. I ordered a basic black coffee, sat by the window, reviewing property numbers on my laptop. So focused on spreadsheets, I didn't even notice the woman at the next table until she spoke. Her voice cut through my concentration like a bell in a quiet room. She asked if I knew anything about real estate. Said she couldn't help but notice my screen full of property data. She was thinking of buying her first home but felt overwhelmed. When I looked up to answer her, my breath caught. She was stunning. Not just attractive, but luminous. Dark hair, eyes that held secrets, a smile that made the rainy evenings suddenly bright. We started talking. Minutes flew by, my lender meeting completely forgotten. Victoria explained she was in law school, second year, already exhausted but determined. She wanted to be a lawyer because no one in her family had gone to college. She wanted to prove someone from her background could succeed in a profession dominated by privilege. I felt an immediate connection with her, a recognition that we were similar. Both fighters, refusing to accept the limitations of our origins. Ambitious, driven, willing to sacrifice comfort for future success. She told me about growing up in a small apartment with 3 siblings. A mom who worked 2 jobs, a dad who left early. scholarships and loans to pay for school. The pressure of being the hope of her family, the one who was supposed to make it, break the cycle. I shared my story too. Millbrook, the steel mill, collecting cans, building my business from nothing, teaching myself real estate. Victoria listened with an intensity that made me feel seen in a way I rarely experienced. Like she understood not just the words, but the emotions behind them. The hunger, the fear, the determination. We talked for 3 hours that first night, long after my lender had texted to cancel. Long after the coffee shop staff started giving us, "Please leave" looks. When we finally exchanged numbers and said goodbye, I walked to my truck feeling like something significant had happened. Like I'd met someone important. Someone who could be a partner in more than just a romantic sense. I drove home through rain that had softened to mist, thinking about her laugh, her intelligence, the way she talked about the future with the same certainty I felt. I went to sleep with a smile on my face and hope in my chest. Our relationship developed quickly, with an intensity that felt inevitable, not rushed. Like two rivers always meant to merge. We started meeting regularly at that same coffee shop, comparing packed schedules. Me, managing businesses and properties. Her, juggling law school, a part-time job at a law firm, study groups till midnight. But we made time, carved out hours that belonged only to us. Those hours became the best part of both our days. I'd pick Victoria up after her evening classes, and we'd drive around, looking at properties. I'd point out what made a good investment, what was a bad one. She'd ask smart questions, genuinely interested, not just polite. She'd invite me to her tiny apartment, cook dinner. I'd sit at her kitchen counter, telling her about deals, problems. She'd offer perspectives I hadn't considered, play devil's advocate, poke holes in my plans, making me sharper, more thoughtful. We challenged each other, pushed each other, made each other better. The attraction between us was electric. Every touch significant, every kiss a promise. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within 6, we said, "I love you." Within a year, I was certain. Victoria was the person, the one I wanted to build a life with. My match in every way that mattered. My friends, the few I had, because I was always working, they warned me. Said I was moving too fast. A year wasn't long enough. Said successful people attracted partners who wanted their success, not them. But I dismissed it. They hadn't met Victoria. They hadn't seen her when there was nothing to gain. Hadn't witnessed her ambition that matched my own. Victoria wasn't impressed by my money or my properties. In fact, she often pushed back when I wanted to spend money on her, insisted on paying her own way, maintaining her independence. Not being anyone's charity case or trophy girlfriend. She had her own dreams, her own drive, was building her own future. She talked about being a partner in a relationship, not a dependent. About building something together, not one person supporting the other. This attitude, it made me love her more, respect her more, made me believe we could be that power couple I'd always imagined. Both successful in our own right, both contributing to a shared empire. I started including Victoria in my business planning, sharing my goals, strategies. She started including me in her career planning, what kind of law, what kind of firm, eventually, how she might start her own practice. We'd lie in bed late at night, making plans that stretched years into the future. Plans that always included both of us, built on the assumption that we were in this together. Michael and Victoria against the world. I had never felt more certain about anything than I felt about her. When Victoria graduated from law school, top 15% of her class, despite working part-time and no family support, I was there, cheering louder than anyone else. Pride swelled in my chest. I knew how hard she'd worked, how many nights she'd studied, how many times she'd wanted to quit. I'd helped where I could, quizzed her, brought food during study marathons, listened when she needed to vent. But the achievement, it was hers. The degree, the success, all hers. And I never wanted her to forget that. Then came the bar exam. 2 months of intense studying. Victoria was consumed. I supported her. Took on extra work so she could focus. Made sure she had everything she needed. Celebrated with her when she passed on the first try. Only 65% managed that. Victoria accepted a position at a mid-size firm in the city, an hour commute, but a good opportunity. Mentorship, a path to partnership. Brutal hours, demanding work, but Victoria thrived. Quickly established herself as reliable, sharp, willing to do whatever it took. I watched her transform from student to lawyer, watched her confidence grow, her skills sharpen, and I fell more in love with her success, her determination, the woman she was becoming. I never suspected that same ambition I admired would eventually be turned against me, like a weapon I had handed her myself. After 2 years of dating, I decided it was time to propose. Not because of pressure, but because I couldn't imagine a future without Victoria. She was so integral to my life. Her absence was unthinkable. I planned an elaborate proposal, rented a rooftop downtown, flowers, candles, a photographer. No expense spared. This was the most important question I'd ever ask. But when the evening came, standing on that rooftop, city lights spread out like fallen stars, my elaborate plan just faded. I dropped to one knee and spoke from my heart, told her she was the best thing that ever happened to me, that she made me want to be better, that I wanted to spend every day of the rest of my life making her as happy as she made me. I asked her to marry me, my voice shaking with emotion. Victoria said yes, tears streaming down her face with a certainty that matched my own. We held each other on that rooftop, the photographer capturing 2 people who believed they'd found forever, who thought they were writing a love story, not the first chapter of a tragedy. The ring I gave her was substantial, a 2-carat diamond, 3 months of my income, as tradition suggested. She gasped when she saw it, said it was too much. But I insisted. I wanted the world to know she was claimed, loved, valued. I wanted a symbol on her finger that reflected how I felt inside. We set the wedding for the following spring, wanting time for something special. We dove into preparations with the same intensity we brought to everything. Venues, caterers, flowers. Blending our visions. Excited about the celebration, but even more excited about the marriage itself. About officially being partners in every sense. Building our future together. The wedding day was perfect. A perfect April afternoon in a garden venue. Blooming flowers, gentle sunshine. It felt like a blessing, like nature itself was celebrating. I stood at the altar in my tailored suit, watching Victoria walk down the aisle. My heart, I thought it might explode. The sheer, overwhelming emotion of seeing the woman I loved, moving toward me, to promise forever. Her dress, white and flowing, her smile radiant and real, tears in her eyes that matched mine. The ceremony was beautiful, personal. Vows we'd written ourselves. Words about partnership, support, choosing each other every day. Words that felt sacred and true, that everyone witnessing believed came from our souls. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and we kissed as everyone cheered, I felt complete in a way I never had before. All the hard work, all the sacrifice, all the years of building, it had all led to this moment, to this person. Everything made sense. The reception stretched into the night. Dinner, dancing, toast from friends and family. My parents cried tears of joy. Victoria's mother held my hand, thanking me for loving her daughter so well. Everyone who mattered, gathered in one place, witnessing the joining of 2 people who seemed destined for extraordinary things together. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, as all first years are. Learning to share space, compromise, navigate those small irritations of constant proximity. But overall, it was happy. More good moments than bad, more laughter than arguments, more love than frustration. My real estate portfolio kept growing, 14 properties now, with plans for 20 by year-end. My other businesses thrived, too, including a property management company I started for my own rentals that now manage properties for other investors. Another income stream. Victoria was excelling at her law firm. Bigger cases, more responsibility, getting noticed by partners. Building a reputation as meticulous, exceptional. Someone to be trusted with important clients, complex matters. We bought a house together. Beautiful, for bedrooms, good neighborhood. Nothing ostentatious, but comfortable. A place we could see raising children. We filled it with furniture, memories, dreams. We'd sit on our back patio on weekend mornings, drinking coffee, reading the paper. Me, reviewing property listings. Her, case files. Comfortable in silence, happy in each other's presence. And I'd look at her and think how lucky I was, how grateful, how certain I had been right about her, about us. about forever. But there were moments, small moments. I noticed them, but I dismissed them. Because I wanted everything to be perfect, right? Victoria seemed distant sometimes, distracted. Snapped at me over nothing, then apologized quickly. Worked late more often than seemed necessary. Took phone calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones. I told myself she was stressed from work. Law firms were demanding. Partner track was brutal. Everyone had moods. It didn't mean anything fundamental was wrong. Victoria assured me everything was fine when I asked. Kissed me, smiled, told me not to worry. Said she was just tired. Difficult case, firm politics. And I believed her. Because I wanted to believe her. Doubt felt like betrayal. Questioning my wife felt like admitting my judgment was wrong. And I had built my entire life on trusting my judgment. So I pushed the worry down. Focused on my businesses, on making more money, on building security for our future. Telling myself my job was to provide, protect, support. If Victoria was struggling, the solution was for me to be more successful. To take stress off her by ensuring our financial foundation was rock solid. I worked harder, closed more deals, expanded faster. All in service of a vision where Victoria could eventually stop working if she wanted. Could start her own firm with my backing. Could have every option available because I had built enough wealth to make anything possible. By our second anniversary, my net worth had crossed $5 million. Surreal for a kid who once collected cans for nickels. I celebrated by surprising Victoria with a trip to Paris. First-class tickets, a suite at a 5-star hotel, reservations at restaurants you booked months in advance. She seemed thrilled. Posted pictures on social media, us in front of the Eiffel Tower, at sidewalk cafes, walking along the Seine. Pictures that showed a happy couple living a dream life. Everyone who saw them thought we were perfect. Had it all figured out. Relationship goals. But during that trip, there were moments. I'd catch Victoria looking at me, strangely. An expression I couldn't quite read. Something between calculation and dissatisfaction. Something that made me uncomfortable, even though I couldn't articulate why. When I asked if something was wrong, she'd smile, say everything was perfect. Kiss me, hold my hand, say she was just taking it all in. And I'd accept the explanation. Because the alternative was terrifying. Admitting that maybe I didn't know my wife as well as I thought. Maybe there were parts of her she kept hidden. Maybe the person I married was becoming someone else, or had always been someone else, and I was just now seeing it. Victoria started talking more frequently about wanting to start her own law firm. Tired of working for partners who took most of the profit while she did most of the work. Her own vision for a firm, building something hers. I encouraged this dream. Told her I'd support her however she needed, financially, emotionally, practically. My success was meant to enable her success. We were partners. Her dreams were my dreams. We started planning in earnest. Timelines, budgets, business models, kind of law, clients, office space, hiring, marketing. All the million details. Victoria came alive during these planning sessions in a way I hadn't seen since law school. Animated, excited, full of ideas. And I loved seeing her like this. Loved feeling like I was contributing to something important to her. Loved imagining us both as business owners, entrepreneurs, builders of our own empires. I offered to invest in her firm. A substantial amount to get it started right. To skip the struggling startup phase, launch with enough capital to be competitive. And Victoria accepted, with what seemed like genuine gratitude. Hugs, kisses, promises. She wouldn't let me down. This was going to be amazing. We were going to build something incredible together. Over the next year, I invested increasingly large amounts into Victoria's planned law firm. Money for office space, furniture, technology, hiring, marketing. 1,000 other things that, apparently, cost more than I had anticipated. Victoria handled all the planning. Said she wanted to surprise me with the final result. Wanted me to walk in on opening day and see what she had built. And I trusted her completely. Wrote checks without question. Transferred money whenever she asked. Because I believed in her vision, her capability, our partnership. I was busy with my own businesses anyway. Acquired 3 more properties, launched a construction company to handle my renovations that was now taking outside clients. I was happy to let Victoria run her firm startup while I ran my ventures. both of us working toward our individual successes that would combine into our shared success. Victoria's demeanor changed during this period. More confident, yes, but also more distant. Spending long hours, allegedly working on firm setup. Coming home late, exhausted. Sometimes not coming home until the next morning. Claiming she'd fallen asleep at the office or stayed at a hotel nearby to save commute time. I didn't love this arrangement, but I understood it. Remembered my own early business days, practically living at work. Building something from nothing required everything you had. I supported her, even when I missed her. Even when our house felt empty. Even when I ate dinner alone more often than together. I believed this was temporary. Believed that once the firm launched, things would normalize. Believed the sacrifice now would lead to happiness later. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in October. Delivered to our house in an expensive envelope with embossed lettering. Formal, impressive. Just like Victoria. It announced the grand opening of Hayes Law Group, her firm. Scheduled for the following Saturday evening. A celebration. To mark the official launch, introduce the firm to potential clients, referral sources, the legal community. I felt a surge of pride reading it, seeing her name in elegant script. Knowing all her hard work and my financial support had led to this moment. She was achieving her dream. Victoria seemed excited but also nervous. Said she wanted everything perfect. This night would set the tone for the firm's future. She'd invited everyone who mattered in the local legal world, plus friends and family. Probably 150 people. I offered to help with planning or setup, but she insisted she had it under control. Hired an event planner, everything arranged. All I needed to do was show up, handsome and proud, be the supportive husband, celebrating her achievement. I asked what I should wear. She suggested my best suit. Black tie optional, people would be formal. She wanted everyone to see us as the power couple we were. Successful, sophisticated, impressive. I went shopping. New suit. Expensive, perfectly tailored. I wanted to look like I belonged next to Victoria. Wanted to make her proud the way she made me proud. The week before the opening, Victoria was gone almost entirely. Claimed she was handling last-minute details, meeting potential clients, making sure everything was perfect. I barely saw her. Came home to an empty house, woke up to an empty bed. While I missed her, I understood. Remembered my own business launches, how consuming they were. Every detail crucial, every decision weighted. I sent encouraging texts. She responded with brief thank yous. I tried calling, but she rarely answered. When she did, she sounded stressed, distracted. Asked me to trust that everything would be worth it. That after Saturday, we could relax, enjoy the success together. I counted down the days. Excited to see what Victoria had built. Excited to celebrate with her. Excited to move past this intense startup phase into something more sustainable, more balanced. I imagined walking into the firm with her, meeting her hires, seeing the office space she designed, shaking hands with potential clients. Being introduced as Victoria's husband and business partner. Because even though I wasn't day-to-day, my investment made me a partner in her success. My support made this possible. And I was proud of that. Proud of her. Proud of us. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather. Cool, clear, leaves turning golden red. The kind of day that feels significant, like nature was cooperating with important events. I spent the morning working out, the afternoon getting ready. Showered, shaved, put on my new suit, looked at myself in the mirror, and saw a man who had come far from collecting cans in Millbrook. A man who had built something from nothing. A man whose wife was launching her own law firm, partly because he had made it financially possible. I felt good, felt successful, felt like I'd earned my place in the world. Victoria had stayed at a hotel near the office the night before. Texted that morning to say she was handling final preparations, would see me at the party. Told me to arrive at 7 o'clock sharp. Said she loved me, couldn't wait to celebrate together. I arrived at the office building at 6:55. Always punctual. Stood outside for a moment, looking at the building. Impressive. Modern. Glass and steel. Screamed success, professionalism. The directory showed Hayes Law Group on the 3rd floor. I rode the elevator up, anticipation building in my chest. Excitement. To see Victoria's vision realized. To celebrate this milestone. to start the next chapter of our lives together. The elevator doors opened to a hallway. Signs directed guests to the Hayes Law Group opening reception. I followed them to a set of double doors, propped open. Revealed a large office suite, transformed into a party space. First thing I noticed, how many people. Packed with well-dressed individuals, wine glasses, buzz of conversation and laughter. Second thing, how expensive everything looked. Modern furniture, elaborate catering, open bar, professionally designed signage. I'd invested a lot of money, but seeing it all, it was even more than I'd calculated. A small voice in my head wondered about costs, budgets. But I pushed it aside. Tonight was about celebration, not accounting. I walked into the reception area, looking for Victoria, wanting to find my wife, congratulate her. And that's when I heard it. A voice from somewhere in the crowd, cutting through the noise like a knife. Loud enough to be heard. Deliberate in its volume, its cruelty. A voice that said the words that would change everything. Oh my God, the TESTRUN husband is here. I can't believe she actually invited him. This is going to be hilarious. I stopped walking. The words hit me like a physical blow. Confusion, shock, a dawning horror spread through my chest. TESTRUN husband. What the hell did that even mean? Surely I'd misheard. Surely it was about someone else. But then I saw people turning to look at me. Smiles that were wrong. Smiles of mockery, amusement, pity. Whispering to each other, pointing in my direction. And the horrible reality began to sink in. They were talking about me. I was the TESTRUN husband. Somehow, my wife's colleagues and friends knew something I didn't. Something that turned my marriage into a joke they were all in on. I stood frozen in the doorway, feeling exposed, humiliated. Every eye in the room on me. Laughter from everywhere and nowhere. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Trying to find an explanation that didn't shatter everything I believed about my life, my marriage. Then the crowd parted, and I saw Victoria, my wife, standing near the center of the room, stunning in a red dress that probably cost thousands. She was looking directly at me, with an expression that was cold. So cold. Nothing like the woman I'd kissed goodbye that morning. Nothing like the woman I'd married. Everything about her face and posture communicated distance. Disdain. And my blood turned to ice, because I suddenly understood. Something very bad was about to happen. Something I hadn't seen coming. Something Victoria had planned. Victoria walked toward me, the crowd watching. Silence spread through the room as people sensed drama. She stopped a few feet away. Close enough to speak, but far enough to maintain separation. Far enough to make it clear we weren't together. Weren't united. Weren't anything I thought we were. She held an envelope in her hand. Expensive paper, matching the invitation. She extended it toward me with a smile that was all edges, no warmth. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. And she spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice clear, strong, completely devoid of emotion. Words that would replay in my mind for years. Words that would haunt my dreams and poison my memories. Michael, thank you for coming. I'm glad you could make it to witness the opening of my firm. The first official act of Hayes Law Group, the first client we're serving, is handling my divorce from you. These are the papers. Sign them and leave. Your job here is done. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers. A few people actually laughed. Laughed at my humiliation. Laughed at my shock. Laughed at my pain. I stood there, holding the envelope. Physical evidence that my marriage was over. That my wife had been planning this. Set me up for public humiliation. Invited me to her law firm opening specifically to destroy me in front of an audience. My hands shook as I processed what was happening. My mind struggling to catch up. How had I gotten here? How had I missed this? How had the woman I loved and trusted turned into this stranger with cruel eyes, divorcing me at her own party? Questions flooded my mind. I wanted to shout, but I couldn't form the words. Why? How long? What had I done? Had anything about our relationship been real? But I didn't shout. Didn't demand answers. Didn't make a scene. Even in my shock, my pain, my humiliation, my mind was working. Calculating. I understood. Victoria wanted me to break down. Wanted me to beg, to cry, to look even more pathetic in front of these people. Wanted to cement her narrative, that I was weak, nothing, just a test-run husband who had served his purpose and could now be discarded. And I decided, in that moment, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I wouldn't play the role she'd scripted. I would walk out with whatever dignity I could salvage. And then, I would respond. In ways she hadn't anticipated. In ways that would show her I was not weak. Was not nothing. Was someone she would deeply regret underestimating. I looked at Victoria for a long, long moment. This woman I'd loved, supported, believed in. This woman who had just publicly destroyed our marriage. I felt something shift inside me. The hurt began to crystallize into something harder. Colder. More useful. I took the envelope from her hand. Didn't open it. Didn't look at the papers. And I spoke. For the first and only time since entering that room. My voice quiet, but steady. The voice of someone who was done. Finished. Already moving on in his mind. Consider it done. Then I turned. Walked toward the elevator. Walked through a crowd that parted for me, whispers following in my wake. Head up, shoulders back. Refusing to show the devastation I felt inside. Refusing to give them the broken man they expected. The elevator ride down felt endless. Those few seconds stretched into eternity. Only when the doors closed, and I was alone did my careful composure crack. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, took deep breaths, trying to hold myself together. Trying not to fall apart in a building elevator where security cameras would capture my breakdown. I made it to my car, sat in the driver's seat with that divorce envelope beside me, and I let myself feel it, let the wave of emotions crash over me. Grief, rage, betrayal, humiliation, all mixing into something that hurt so badly I thought I might physically come apart. But I didn't fall apart, didn't sit there crying until security asked me to leave. I had learned long ago that emotions were temporary, but actions were permanent. Feelings needed to be felt, yes, but then they needed to be channeled into something productive, something useful, something that would change my situation instead of just expressing my pain. I pulled out my phone. My hand still shook slightly, and I started making calls, setting in motion a plan that was forming in my mind. A plan that would show Victoria exactly what she had done, exactly what she had thrown away, exactly how badly she had miscalculated, thinking I would just sign papers and disappear quietly. First call, my lawyer, Richard. He'd handled my business contracts and property purchases for years. I woke him on a Saturday evening, apologizing, but saying it was an emergency. Explained the situation quickly. Asked what I needed to do immediately to protect myself. To stop the bleeding. To prepare for what was coming. Richard was shocked. He'd met Victoria multiple times, considered her a friend. But he switched quickly into professional mode. Told me not to sign anything without him reviewing it. Told me to document everything. Told me to start gathering financial records and evidence of my contributions to the marriage. Told me to cut off access to any joint accounts or credit cards immediately. And told me to be very careful about what I said or did. Anything could be used against me. Second call, my accountant, Sarah. She managed my business and personal finances. Knew every dollar I had. Explained the situation. Asked her to prepare a complete accounting of everything I had contributed to Victoria's law firm. Every payment, transfer, investment. Every dollar I had given her for her business. Asked Sarah to have it ready by Monday morning. I was going to need it. Sarah was sympathetic but efficient. Said she'd pull all the records, create a detailed report, document the full extent of my financial contributions. She also suggested I freeze any credit cards Victoria had access to and transfer money out of joint accounts into personal accounts before Victoria could drain them. Said it was common in divorces for spouses to try to grab whatever assets they could as quickly as possible. Third call, my bank. Spoke to after-hour service. Requested immediate holds on joint accounts and credit cards. Requested transfers of funds from joint accounts into my personal accounts. Protecting my money from being taken. Protecting assets I had earned and saved and built over years of work. The customer service rep was understanding. Said she'd seen this situation before. Processed the requests quickly. Within 20 minutes, my joint financial accounts were locked. The money that was legally mine was secured where Victoria couldn't touch it. But I didn't stop there. Protecting myself wasn't enough. I understood that Victoria had declared war. And in war, you don't just defend. You attack. You hit back in ways that hurt, in ways that showed your opponent they had made a terrible mistake. I pulled up the contract Victoria had signed when I invested in her law firm. The legal document outlining my $20 million investment and its terms. I reviewed it carefully, looking for clauses, conditions, ways out. And I found what I needed. A clause stating I could withdraw my investment at any time within the first 6 months of operation if business conditions changed significantly or if the business relationship was compromised. The firm had officially opened tonight, which meant we were definitely within the first 6 months. And the business relationship? It was certainly compromised, given Victoria had just served me divorce papers at the opening party. That meant I had legal grounds to pull my money, to withdraw my $20 million investment, to remove the foundation she had built her firm on. I called Richard back, asked him to review the contract, asked if I was reading it correctly. Richard confirmed, "Yes, Michael, you absolutely can withdraw your investment under these circumstances. The contract Victoria signed gives you that right." And Richard also noted, with a hint of satisfaction in his voice, that without that $20 million, the firm would almost certainly collapse immediately. Victoria had spent most of it already: office space, hiring, equipment, startup costs. She'd be left with a firm she couldn't afford to operate and debts she couldn't afford to pay. I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. The first positive emotion I'd felt since walking into that party, because I realized I held more power than Victoria had calculated. I held the ability to destroy what she had built, just as thoroughly as she had tried to destroy me. I composed an email to Victoria and to the law firm she had supposedly started, professionally worded, legally sound, citing the contract clause and the compromised business relationship, officially notifying her that I was withdrawing my $20 million investment, effective immediately, that any funds remaining from my investment should be returned within 30 days, as the contract specified, and that I expected a full accounting of how my money had been spent. I copied Richard and Sarah, making sure there were witnesses to my notification, making sure the documentation was solid, and then I hit send. Watched the email disappear into the void, knowing it would land like a bomb, knowing it would destroy everything Victoria thought she had accomplished. Then I made more calls to the party planner I knew Victoria had hired. I'd seen the invoice. Calls to the catering company, calls to the office furniture supplier, calls to every vendor I could identify that Victoria had contracted with for the firm. And I canceled every payment I had authorized, stopped every check that hadn't cleared, invoked clauses in contracts that allowed me to withdraw as the financial guarantor, systematically dismantling the financial foundation of Hayes Law Group, with the same methodical precision I had used to build my own businesses. With each call, each cancellation, each withdrawal, I felt lighter, felt the humiliation and hurt transforming into something else, something like justice, something like revenge. And I understood. This was my response to being called a TESTRUN husband, my response to being publicly humiliated, my response to having my love, my trust, my support thrown back in my face like trash. I spent 3 hours in my car in that parking lot, making calls, sending emails, canceling contracts. 3 hours systematically destroying what Victoria had built on my money. And when I was finally done, when every payment was stopped, every contract canceled, every dollar secured or withdrawn, I started my car, drove home through dark streets, exhausted but also satisfied, like I had fought back, like I had shown Victoria I wasn't weak, wasn't nothing, wasn't someone who could be discarded without consequences. I went home, to the house we had bought together, the house that was in both our names, but that I had paid for entirely. I poured myself a drink, sat in the dark living room, waiting, knowing that soon my phone would start ringing, knowing that Victoria would realize what I had done, knowing that she was about to understand exactly what she had lost. I sat in that dark living room for about 23 minutes. Then my phone started buzzing, vibrating on the coffee table with increasing urgency. The screen lit up with incoming calls and texts that started as a trickle and quickly became a flood. I picked it up, watched the notifications pile up, call after call from Victoria, from numbers I didn't recognize, probably people at the party, from Richard, my lawyer, from Sarah, my accountant, from vendors, companies, individuals, all suddenly realizing the money they expected was gone. Checks canceled. The foundation of Hayes' law group evaporated. I didn't answer any of the calls. Just watched them accumulate. Watched the missed call counter climb. Victoria's name over and over and over again, with a persistence that would have been flattering if the circumstances were different. If she was calling because she loved me instead of because she needed me. If she was reaching out as a wife instead of as someone panicking about money. The texts, increasingly desperate, starting with confusion. What's happening with the payments? The investments? Progressing to anger. Fix whatever mistake has been made. Eventually, deteriorating into panic. Call me back. We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Things that made it clear Victoria had realized the magnitude of what I had done. The calls continued for hours, the number climbing higher and higher. I left my phone on the table, went upstairs, started packing Victoria's things, methodically, going through closets, drawers, pulling out everything that belonged to her, folding clothes, boxing shoes, gathering jewelry, cosmetics, all the possessions she'd accumulated during our marriage. I worked steadily without emotion, treating it like any other task that needed completing. By 3 o'clock in the morning, I had packed 27 boxes and 6 suitcases, stacked them neatly in the garage, removed every trace of her from our bedroom, bathroom, closet, erased her presence from my space. Then I changed the locks on all the doors. Simple task, 20 minutes, a screwdriver, lock sets I had on hand because I owned rental properties and changed locks regularly. When I was done, Victoria would not be able to walk into this house without my permission, would not have access to what was mine. She would learn that her actions had consequences that extended beyond money. I went back to my phone. The missed call counter, 456 calls. An absurd number. Roughly 1 call every few minutes for the past 6 hours. Desperation beyond anything I had ever witnessed. Still, I didn't answer. Didn't respond. Let the calls and texts pile up like evidence. Evidence of exactly how badly Victoria needed what I had provided. Exactly how much power I had held all along without even realizing it. At 4:30 in the morning, just as dawn was beginning to hint at its arrival, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Speed that suggested urgency. A car door slamming. Footsteps running to the front door. Pounding on that door. Fists hitting wood with force that made the door shudder. I knew. Without looking. Victoria had come. She'd finally left her law firm opening party, or wherever she had been. She was here to confront me, to demand answers, to try to fix what I had broken. I walked to the door slowly, not hurrying, making her wait, making her understand that I controlled this interaction now. When I finally opened the door, there she was, standing on my porch, looking nothing like the composed, cruel woman who had handed me divorce papers. Looking instead like someone who had spent the night crying and panicking. Makeup smeared, expensive dress wrinkled, hair disheveled. And when she saw me, she started talking immediately, words tumbling out in a rush, saying there'd been a terrible misunderstanding, saying she hadn't meant what happened at the party, saying it was all a joke that went too far, saying we could work this out, saying she loved me, saying every word I had wanted to hear for years. But none of them landed. They were too late, coming from the wrong motivation. Transparently about money instead of love. I let her talk until she ran out of words. Let her exhaust herself with explanations, justifications, pleas. Then I responded, with a calmness that was more devastating than anger would have been. I told her I had received her divorce papers and would be happy to sign them, that I had withdrawn my investment from her law firm, as was my legal right under the contract she had signed. That I had canceled all payments and contracts for which I was financially responsible because I was no longer willing to fund her business. That I had packed her belongings, and they were in the garage, and she was welcome to take them. And that she was no longer welcome in my house, as I had changed the locks, and she should make arrangements to stay elsewhere going forward. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions as I spoke. Shock, disbelief, anger, desperation. She tried to push past me into the house, but I blocked her. Held firm. Told her this was no longer her home. Told her she had made her choice when she handed me divorce papers in front of a room full of people. Told her she couldn't unmake that choice just because the consequences were worse than she expected. She started crying then. Real tears, streaming down her face. And she tried a different approach. Tried to touch me. Tried to appeal to our history. Said she'd made a mistake. Said she was under a lot of stress. Said her colleagues had pressured her into making a dramatic statement to establish her independence. Said she hadn't thought it through. Said she would do anything to fix this. I felt nothing. Watching her cry. No sympathy, no softness, no temptation to forgive. Because I understood. These were the tears of someone who had lost access to my money, not of someone who had lost me. These were the tears of someone facing consequences, not of someone facing genuine remorse. I told Victoria that if she wanted to discuss the divorce, she could contact me through Richard, my lawyer. That I would not be communicating with her directly. Whatever they needed to resolve would be resolved through legal channels. And I suggested she hire a lawyer to represent her interests, because Hayes Law Group clearly couldn't do it, given the firm no longer had funding and would probably be dissolved within days. Victoria's tears stopped abruptly, replaced by anger. Her face transformed into something ugly. She started yelling, called me petty, vindictive, cruel, said I was destroying her career out of spite, said I was proving I never really loved her, said real men didn't abandon their wives just because of a mistake, said I was nothing without her anyway, just a kid from Millbrook who got lucky with some real estate deals. And she had been doing me a favor by staying with me as long as she had, giving me legitimacy, class, access to a world I would never have reached without her. Her words were meant to hurt, meant to make me doubt myself. They were the last weapons she had left. But they bounced off me harmlessly, because I knew they weren't true, knew my success had nothing to do with her, knew I had built everything myself. Her attempt to claim credit for my achievements just confirmed what I was already learning. I had never really known Victoria at all. I had been in love with a performance rather than a person. I told Victoria calmly that she needed to leave. Her things were packed in the garage. She should collect them and go. And when she refused, planted herself on my porch, said she wasn't leaving until I fixed this, I pulled out my phone, started dialing the police, explaining I would report trespassing if she didn't leave voluntarily. Victoria looked shocked that I would actually call the police on her, like she couldn't believe I was serious. But when the dispatcher answered and I started providing my address, Victoria finally moved, walked to the garage, started loading boxes and suitcases into her car. Multiple trips, shooting me furious looks each time. I watched her passively, helping with nothing, saying nothing, just waiting for her to finish and leave. On her final trip, she stopped in front of me, tried one more time, her voice desperate, raw, asked me how I could do this to her, how I could destroy everything she had worked for. Didn't I understand she had nothing without the firm? Nowhere to go, no way to pay for the office space, the employees, any of it. Didn't I care what happened to her at all? I looked at my wife, this woman who had called me a test-run husband, this woman who had planned my humiliation as entertainment for her colleagues, this woman who had turned our marriage into a transaction she was now canceling. And I told her the truth. I told her she should have thought about consequences before handing me divorce papers at her law firm opening. Should have considered what she was throwing away before she threw it. Should have remembered that the money she spent so freely came from somewhere. Came from someone. Came from me. And now she would learn what life was like without it. Victoria left as the sun was rising. Her car packed with boxes. Her face streaked with mascara. I closed my door, locked it, and went upstairs to my bedroom. The one that no longer held any trace of her. I lay down on my bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. I had gone to a party expecting to celebrate my wife's success, and I had returned home having destroyed that success. Gone from happily married to separated, heading for divorce. From trusting, supportive husband to betrayed, vengeful ex. The speed of the transformation left me disoriented, like I'd fallen through a trapdoor into a different life. My phone kept buzzing with calls and messages, but I ignored it. I needed silence, needed time to think, needed to figure out what came next. Because while I had responded decisively in the moment, I hadn't really planned beyond that. Hadn't thought about what my life would look like going forward. Hadn't imagined a future that didn't include Victoria. Even in my worst moments, I had believed we would work through anything. Sleep wouldn't come, despite my exhaustion. My mind was too active, too loud, replaying the scene at the law firm opening over and over, analyzing every detail, trying to understand how I had missed the signs, how I had been so blind to what Victoria was planning, how she had managed to make me believe everything was fine when she was actually preparing to publicly humiliate and divorce me. By Monday morning, I was exhausted but focused. I'd spent the weekend piecing together information, making more calls, meeting with Richard to go over the divorce papers, my rights, my strategy. Meeting with Sarah, my accountant, to review the accounting of money I had given Victoria and how much could potentially be recovered. I was beginning to understand the full scope of what had happened. Victoria's divorce papers were aggressive, asking for half of everything I owned. My real estate portfolio, my businesses. Claiming she had supported my career and deserved to share in my success. Claiming we had been partners in every sense, and she had contributed equally, even if not financially. Richard said this was going to be a fight. Expensive, time-consuming, ugly. But he also said I had strong positions. Proof of what I had built before the marriage, and what I had built during the marriage with my own money and effort. Documentation that Victoria's career and firm were funded entirely by me. And the trump card, I had withdrawn my investment. That meant Victoria couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle, even if she wanted one. Sarah's accounting was revealing. And disturbing. It showed that I had given Victoria $20 million for her law firm over the course of a year. Money transferred in chunks as she claimed to need it for various expenses. But Sarah had done some investigating. She discovered that Hayes Law Group's actual expenses were maybe $12 million, which meant $8 million was unaccounted for, had gone somewhere other than the business. Sarah suggested I demand a full accounting and consider whether Victoria had committed fraud or embezzlement. But more disturbing than missing money was information that started coming to me from unexpected sources. Former colleagues, friends who had been at the law firm opening, witnessed my humiliation. Now, they felt guilty enough to reach out, to tell me things they thought I should know, to share truths Victoria had kept hidden. The first call came from a woman named Jennifer. She worked at the same firm Victoria had before starting her own practice. Jennifer was crying as she explained she'd never liked what Victoria was doing, but hadn't felt it was her place to interfere. Hadn't wanted to get involved in someone else's marriage. But after seeing what happened Saturday night, she couldn't stay silent anymore. Jennifer told me Victoria had been having an affair for at least 6 months, maybe longer, with another lawyer named Harrison Prescott, a partner at a competing firm. Everyone at Victoria's old firm knew about it, had seen them together at legal conferences, bar association events, had heard Victoria talking about Harrison like he was her real partner, while I was just the money guy, just the bank that funded her life. Just the test-run husband she was using until she could afford to upgrade. Jennifer said Victoria and Harrison had apparently planned to merge their practices once Victoria's firm was established. Planned to become a power couple in the legal world. Harrison came from old money connections. He was exactly the kind of man Victoria had always wanted. Someone who could give her the social status and professional legitimacy she craved. I had apparently been a stepping stone. Someone useful until someone better came along. I listened to Jennifer with a coldness spreading through my chest. A numbness, probably my mind's way of protecting me from the full impact of what I was learning. I thanked her for telling me, hung up, and sat very still, trying to absorb this information. Victoria had been cheating on me, had been planning to leave me, had used me for my money and support while building a life that didn't include me. And the test-run husband comment? It wasn't just a cruel joke. It was an actual description of how she saw me, how she had always seen me, as temporary, as practice, as something to use and discard when something better appeared. More calls came throughout the day. More people who had been at the party, or who knew Victoria, or who felt compelled to share what they knew. A picture emerged. Consistent. Devastating. Victoria had been telling people for months that she was only staying with me until her firm was established. That I was a good provider, but not the kind of man she wanted long-term. That I was too blue-collar, too focused on money, not sophisticated enough for the world she was entering. And she had apparently laughed about me with colleagues, made jokes about my background, my manners, my lack of polish. Presented me as an embarrassment she was stuck with temporarily. Every revelation felt like a knife to my chest. Every piece of information confirming that my marriage had been a lie. That the woman I loved had never existed. That I had been played more completely than I could have imagined. Richard called with more information, with legal implications. He'd done some investigating of his own through connections in the legal community. What he learned was explosive. Harrison Prescott, Victoria's affair partner, had apparently also invested in Hayes Law Group. He'd put in $5 million and was planning to merge his practice with Victoria's once her firm was established. Harrison's money explained some of the discrepancy in Victoria's expenses, explained where some of my investment had actually gone. Victoria had been using my money to pay for office space and staff, while using Harrison's money and possibly my money for personal expenses. For the lifestyle she wanted to project. For the apartment she had apparently rented, where she and Harrison spent time together. Richard explained that this information was incredibly useful for the divorce. It showed Victoria had been fraudulent and unfaithful and was not entitled to the spousal support she was demanding. But Richard also warned that Harrison Prescott came from a powerful family. Connections throughout the legal system. Fighting them would be difficult. Victoria now had access to resources I couldn't match in terms of legal influence and social pressure. I listened to this warning and felt anger replace the numbness, felt my determination harden into something unbreakable. Because I understood, Victoria and Harrison thought they could destroy me, thought my blue-collar background meant I would be easy to beat, thought my lack of connections and pedigree meant I was vulnerable. And I decided right then, I would prove them wrong. I would show them that money and determination could beat connections and privilege. I would make them regret underestimating the kid from Millbrook who had built an empire from nothing. The week following the law firm opening was chaotic, in ways I hadn't anticipated, consequences rippling out from my decisions in patterns I couldn't have predicted. Hayes Law Group collapsed within 72 hours of my investment withdrawal. Unable to pay rent, staff, vendors, employees quitting, creditors calling, the office space reclaimed by the landlord. Victoria's dream firm existed for exactly one weekend before imploding spectacularly. The legal community was apparently talking about nothing else. The story of the law firm opening, the divorce papers, the investment withdrawals spreading like wildfire. Opinions were divided. Some thought I was vindictive and cruel for destroying Victoria's career. Others thought Victoria got exactly what she deserved for humiliating her husband publicly. I didn't care what people thought. Wasn't interested in public opinion or reputation management. I was focused entirely on protecting myself, my assets, and moving forward. Victoria tried repeatedly to contact me. Hundreds of voicemails, progressing from angry to pleading to threatening. But I never responded. Communicated only through Richard. Let my lawyer handle every interaction. Maintained boundaries that Victoria kept trying to cross. She hired a lawyer eventually, presumably funded by Harrison Prescott since she had no money of her own. And the divorce proceedings began in earnest. Motions, counter-motions, demands, refusals. Both sides digging in for what was clearly going to be a protracted battle. 3 weeks after the law firm opening disaster, Sarah, my accountant, called me. Urgency in her voice. Said she'd found something important. Something that changed everything. She needed to meet with me and Richard immediately. We convened at Richard's office that afternoon. Sarah laid out documents, spreadsheets, bank statements she'd obtained through legal channels and her own investigative work. And what she had discovered was worse than I had imagined. And also, better for my legal position. Sarah had traced my $20 million investment through Victoria's accounts. She discovered that of that $20 million, only $9 million had actually gone to legitimate business expenses for Hayes Law Group, while $11 million had been diverted to other accounts, to personal spending, to investments in properties titled only in Victoria's name, to transfers that supported Harrison Prescott's business ventures, to a lifestyle that was far more expensive than I had realized. Victoria had apparently been living a completely separate life, funded by my money, buying designer clothes, expensive jewelry, a luxury condo downtown that I knew nothing about, trips with Harrison she claimed were for legal conferences but were actually vacations, spending my money to build a life with another man while pretending everything was fine at home. Sarah explained that this level of deception and financial fraud gave me significant leverage in the divorce. Victoria had essentially stolen from me, misappropriated funds that were supposed to be business investments for personal use, and I could potentially file criminal charges in addition to civil claims. I could have Victoria prosecuted for fraud and embezzlement if I chose to pursue that route. Richard agreed, said this discovery changed our entire strategy. Now we could go on offense instead of just defense. We could demand full restitution, plus damages, plus legal fees. We could make Victoria's life extremely difficult unless she agreed to a settlement that was favorable to me, accepting minimal spousal support or property division. Essentially, walking away with nothing. I listened to all of this with a satisfaction that was cold and calculated, understanding that I now held all the cards. Victoria had overplayed her hand and had been sloppy in her deception. Her sloppiness had given me the weapon I needed to end this on my terms. But I also felt something like sadness beneath the satisfaction. Sadness that my marriage had come to this. That the woman I loved had turned out to be a fraud. That years of my life had been built on lies. I found myself grieving, not for Victoria as she actually was, but for Victoria as I had believed her to be. For the partnership I thought we had. For the future I had imagined that would never exist. Richard reached out to Victoria's lawyer with our findings, laying out the evidence of financial fraud and the potential criminal charges, making it clear that I was prepared to pursue every legal avenue available unless Victoria agreed to dissolve the marriage quickly and quietly, keeping nothing except what she had brought into the marriage, which was essentially nothing. Victoria's lawyer tried to bluff initially, claimed the evidence was circumstantial, wouldn't hold up in court, claimed Victoria had every right to spend marital funds however she chose. But Richard called the bluff, filed preliminary motions with the court, including the detailed accounting and bank records. And within 48 hours, Victoria's lawyer was calling to negotiate, suddenly much more reasonable, suddenly willing to discuss settlement terms. The negotiations were brutal, one-sided. I held all the leverage, and I used it ruthlessly. Within 2 weeks, we had reached an agreement. Victoria would waive all claims to my properties, businesses, and investments, would accept zero spousal support, would return what remained of the diverted $11 million, which was approximately $7 million after her spending spree, would sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing her from discussing our marriage or the divorce publicly, and would admit no wrongdoing while receiving no criminal charges. It was an unconditional surrender dressed up as a settlement, and Victoria had no choice but to accept, because the alternative was criminal prosecution, public exposure of everything she had done, professional disgrace that would prevent her from practicing law, and social destruction that would cost her the life she had been trying to build. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in a courthouse conference room. Both parties present with their lawyers, but not speaking to each other, not making eye contact, treating it like a business transaction rather than the end of a marriage, which was fitting, given that the marriage had apparently been a business transaction for Victoria all along. I signed the papers without emotion, watched Victoria sign with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face, and felt nothing except relief, that it was over, that I could finally close this chapter and move forward, that I was free of someone who had never valued me as anything more than a resource to exploit. When we left the courthouse, Victoria tried one last time to approach me, tried to say something that might have been an apology, or an explanation, or a final manipulation. But I walked past her without slowing, got in my car, and drove away without looking back. That was the last time I saw Victoria Hayes in person. The last time I had to face the woman who had betrayed me so thoroughly. Richard called later to confirm the settlement was recorded and official, that Victoria had 45 days to return the $7 million she owed, that the non-disclosure agreement was binding and enforceable, and that I was officially divorced, officially single, officially free to move on with my life however I chose. The weeks following the divorce were strange. I felt simultaneously liberated and lost, free from Victoria's presence, but uncertain about what came next, successful in my revenge, but not particularly satisfied by it, vindicated legally, but emotionally hollow. I threw myself into work with even more intensity than usual, buying 3 more properties in rapid succession, expanding my construction company into commercial projects, launching a new property management software company I had been planning for months, filling every hour with productivity, progress, achievement. Because empty hours led to thinking, and thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to pain I preferred to avoid. My friends and family were supportive, but didn't quite know what to say. Couldn't understand what I had been through. Most of them had never experienced betrayal at that level. Never had someone they loved completely turn out to be a lie. I found myself isolating, declining invitations, spending evenings alone in my house, which felt too big and too quiet now that I was the only one in it. I went to therapy, recognizing I needed help processing everything. Needed someone objective to help me sort through the emotions, the trauma, the questions about what I had missed, and how I could trust anyone again. My therapist was helpful, providing coping strategies and perspective. But ultimately, I knew healing would take time, would require patience with myself, would mean accepting that some scars were permanent, even if they eventually stopped hurting. 6 months after the divorce, I received a check from Victoria's lawyer for $7 million. The full amount she owed for the diverted funds. Attached was a note in Victoria's handwriting, the first direct communication we'd had since the courthouse. And the note simply said, "You were right to walk away. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find someone who deserves you." I read the note 3 times, trying to decode its meaning. Genuine remorse? Another manipulation? Had she actually learned something? Or was she just sorry she got caught? Ultimately, I decided it didn't matter. Whatever Victoria felt or didn't feel was her problem, not mine. Her apology didn't change what had happened and didn't heal what she had broken. I put the check in the bank, threw the note away, and decided that was the end. I wouldn't think about Victoria Hayes anymore. Wouldn't give her any more space in my mind or my life. I would treat her as a closed chapter, a painful lesson, a cautionary tale about trust and love and the danger of seeing what you want to see instead of what's actually there. I was 30 years old, successful beyond my wildest childhood dreams, financially secure for life if I never worked another day. But I was also divorced and betrayed and carrying wounds that I suspected would never fully heal. And I had to figure out how to move forward from here, how to build a life that felt meaningful when the future I had planned was no longer possible. How to trust anyone again when trust had been so thoroughly weaponized against me. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, 8 months after the divorce was finalized, when my doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. Early enough that I was still in workout clothes, just finished a run. I wasn't expecting anyone. No appointments, no deliveries. So the bell ringing was puzzling, slightly annoying. I walked to the door, debating whether to answer. Not in the mood for solicitors or lost neighbors. But something made me look through the peephole. And what I saw made my breath catch. Standing on my porch was a woman I had never seen before, probably in her early 60s. Well-dressed, suggested money and class. Holding a folder. Looking nervous, but determined. And there was something about her that seemed important. Like this wasn't a random visit, but something I needed to pay attention to. I opened the door, and the woman's face flooded with relief, like she'd been afraid I wouldn't answer. She introduced herself as Margaret Caldwell. Said she was sorry to show up unannounced, but she had something important to tell me. Something she'd been debating for months, whether to share. And she had finally decided I deserved to know the truth. Deserved to understand what had really happened with Victoria. Deserved information that would change how I saw everything. I invited Margaret inside, curiosity overriding caution. I made coffee while she settled in my living room. Then I sat down and asked her to explain. Who was she? Why was she here? What truth was she talking about? Margaret took a deep breath and began a story I hadn't seen coming. A story that added new dimensions to everything I thought I understood. I listened with growing astonishment as she explained that she was Harrison Prescott's mother. Harrison, Victoria's affair partner. She said Harrison was her only child, and she loved him. But that didn't mean she approved of everything he did. And what he had done to me was wrong. Manipulative. Cruel. And she couldn't stay silent anymore. Margaret explained that Harrison had targeted Victoria deliberately, had researched successful young lawyers, and identified Victoria as someone ambitious and vulnerable to his particular kind of manipulation. Someone who wanted status and access to the world Harrison represented. Someone who could be convinced to betray her husband if the right incentives were offered. Harrison had apparently made Victoria a project, seduced her over months, filled her head with ideas about what her life could be if she was with someone from his world instead of someone from my world. Convinced her I was holding her back, was beneath her, was something to be embarrassed about rather than proud of. And Harrison had specifically suggested the law firm opening humiliation as a way to assert her independence and make a clean break. I felt rage building as Margaret talked. Rage at Harrison for orchestrating this. At Victoria for going along with it. At myself for being blind to all of it. But Margaret wasn't finished. She had more to tell me. And what came next was even worse. Margaret explained that Harrison was a con artist, had been running similar schemes for years, targeting women who had access to money or were about to have access to money, seducing them, manipulating them, convincing them to invest in his ventures or give him control of their assets, and then disappearing once the money was gone, leaving them financially and emotionally destroyed. Harrison had apparently done this to at least 4 women that Margaret knew of, possibly more. She had tried to stop him, tried to get him help, threatened to cut off his trust fund. But Harrison was a sociopath, or something close to it. Charming, convincing, completely without conscience. And he always managed to talk his way out of consequences. Margaret said Harrison had targeted Victoria specifically because she had access to my money. He'd researched me, knew I was a successful investor with significant resources. And the plan had been for Victoria to take half of my assets in the divorce, merge her law firm with Harrison's practice, and essentially transfer my wealth to them. And then Harrison would have eventually drained that wealth and moved on to his next target, leaving Victoria with nothing, just like he left all the others with nothing. Margaret's voice shook as she explained why she was telling me this. Said she had watched Harrison destroy Victoria over the past months. Had watched Victoria realize she had been manipulated and used. Had watched her lose everything, including her career and her reputation, and the settlement money that Harrison had convinced her to invest in ventures that promptly failed or never existed at all. And Victoria was now essentially homeless, living with her mother, unable to find work in the legal field because word had spread about the fraud and the scandal. Broken in ways Margaret wasn't sure she could recover from. Margaret said she wasn't excusing what Victoria had done, wasn't suggesting I should forgive her or help her. But she wanted me to understand that Victoria had been a victim, too. Had been targeted by someone expert at manipulation. Had been fed a fantasy that seemed real until it was too late. And the person ultimately responsible was Harrison. Was Margaret's own son. And she was ashamed of what he had done, and wanted to make sure I knew the full story. Knew that I had missed obvious signs, because there weren't obvious signs. That I had been dealing with a professional con artist operating through Victoria as a proxy. Margaret opened the folder she had brought, pulled out documents, bank records, emails, text messages between Harrison and Victoria that she had obtained through methods she didn't explain. Evidence that supported everything she was saying. Evidence that showed Harrison calculating every move and Victoria gradually falling under his influence. And me being discussed as a resource to exploit rather than a person with feelings. I read through the documents, feeling like I was seeing my marriage from a completely different angle. Understanding now that I hadn't just married the wrong person, but had been targeted, had been selected as a mark, had been the victim of a long-term con that I never suspected was happening. Part of me wanted to rage at Margaret, wanted to blame her for raising a monster, wanted to say that this information changed nothing because Victoria had still made choices, had still humiliated me, had still stolen from me. But another part of me felt something like closure, understanding finally why it had happened, why Victoria had changed or had revealed who she really was, why nothing I did or said or gave had been enough. Because I was never the point. I was just the means to an end in someone else's scheme. I asked Margaret what she wanted from me, why she had really come, whether this was some attempt to prevent me from pursuing further legal action against Harrison. And Margaret surprised me, said she wanted nothing. Expected nothing. Just felt I deserved the truth. Deserved to know I hadn't failed or missed something or been inadequate. That I had simply been unlucky enough to cross paths with Harrison, who was very good at what he did. And she hoped this information would help me move forward, would help me trust again someday, would prevent me from blaming myself for something that wasn't my fault. She stood to leave, and I walked her to the door, thanked her for coming, even though I wasn't sure how I felt about anything she had told me. And Margaret paused at the threshold, said one more thing. Victoria had asked her to tell me something if she ever got the chance. Asked her to tell me that loving me had been the only real thing in our marriage, that everything else had been Harrison's poison, but her feelings for me had been genuine, and she was sorry, so sorry for not being strong enough to resist the manipulation, for believing Harrison's lies, for destroying the one good thing in her life. And she understood if I hated her, didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted me to know that I had been loved, even if poorly, even if not enough, even if ultimately betrayed. Margaret left, and I closed the door, stood in my entryway, trying to process this new information, trying to integrate it with everything I thought I knew, trying to decide if it changed anything fundamental or just added context to the same painful story. I spent the day reviewing the documents Margaret had left, seeing my marriage laid out in emails, texts, bank transfers, seeing Harrison's manipulation and Victoria's gradual corruption, and my own presence as a background figure, someone discussed but not really considered, someone's husband but not really someone's partner. And the evidence supported Margaret's story completely, showed that Victoria had been targeted and manipulated and eventually destroyed by someone who did this professionally, who had practice and skill and no conscience. I didn't know what to do with this information, didn't know if it made things better or worse. Didn't know if Victoria deserving some sympathy changed how I felt about what had happened to me. And I realized that healing wasn't linear, wasn't something you achieved and then you were done, but was something you worked at constantly, adjusting and readjusting your understanding, accepting new information and integrating it without letting it destroy the progress you had made. I decided, finally, that Margaret's revelation didn't change my decisions, and didn't make me regret my actions. Because Victoria had still made choices, regardless of Harrison's influence, had still participated in the humiliation and the fraud and the betrayal. But it did help me understand that the situation had been more complex than I realized. That Victoria wasn't simply evil or heartless, but was herself a victim of someone worse. And that understanding allowed me to release some of the anger I had been carrying, to forgive not what she did, but the person she was, to accept that people were complicated and situations were messy, and sometimes there were no clear villains and heroes, just people making choices and dealing with consequences. Life continued for me, with this strange quality of moving forward while feeling stuck, achieving success after success in business, while feeling empty in the places that mattered, being surrounded by people, but feeling fundamentally alone. I existed in this state for more than a year after Margaret's visit. Functional, but not fully alive. Successful, but not satisfied. Healing, but not healed. My businesses thrived. My real estate portfolio expanded to 37 properties. My construction company landed major commercial projects. My property management software company was acquired by a larger tech firm for a sum that added another $8 million to my net worth. By the time I was 32, my net worth exceeded $40 million. Firmly in the category of wealthy by anyone's measure. But the wealth felt hollow, felt like numbers on a screen, rather than security or freedom. I found myself thinking often about my younger self, about that kid collecting cans in Millbrook who thought money would solve everything, would make him happy. I wished I could tell that kid that money solved problems, but created others. That success didn't equal satisfaction. That the things you thought you wanted weren't always the things you needed. My therapist suggested I try dating again, said I had done the work of processing the trauma, understanding the betrayal, forgiving myself for missing signs I couldn't have seen. It was time to take the risk of letting someone in again. Time to accept that Victoria's betrayal didn't mean everyone would betray me. That my judgment wasn't fundamentally broken just because one person had fooled me. That I deserved companionship and love and the chance to build something real with someone trustworthy. I was resistant initially, felt too raw, too cautious, too aware of how badly things could go. But eventually I agreed to try, started going on dates, arranged by friends, or through apps, meeting women over coffee or dinner, making awkward conversation, trying to feel something, trying to find a connection, trying to imagine a future with someone new. The dates were universally disappointing. Not because the women weren't nice, or attractive or interesting, but because I found myself comparing everyone to Victoria. Or, more accurately, comparing everyone to my memory of Victoria before I knew what she really was. And nobody measured up to the fantasy I had believed in. Nobody generated the excitement and certainty I had felt with her. I started to worry that Victoria had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed. That my ability to love and trust was permanently damaged. That I was destined to be alone, not by choice, but by emotional incapacity. Then I met Elena Rodriguez at a real estate investor conference. I wasn't looking for romance. I was looking for business opportunities. Attending a seminar on commercial property development and sitting next to a woman who asked intelligent questions, took detailed notes, and clearly knew what she was doing. When the seminar ended, we started talking about the presentation. Realized we had similar investment philosophies and complementary skill sets. We exchanged business cards, agreed to get coffee to discuss potential collaboration. That coffee meeting turned into a 3-hour conversation about real estate, business, life philosophies. I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. Interested, engaged, and not thinking about Victoria at all. When we parted ways, I realized I hoped I would see Elena again. Hoped that coffee turned into another meeting. Hoped that business interest was, or could become, personal interest. Elena was different from Victoria in fundamental ways. Quiet where Victoria had been loud. Thoughtful where Victoria had been impulsive. Genuine where Victoria had been performative. She had a calmness and a groundedness that I found incredibly appealing. Found myself drawn to, even though it was nothing like the electric intensity one had felt with Victoria. We met several more times, ostensibly to discuss business. Our conversations gradually shifted from entirely professional to more personal, sharing our histories, our goals, our fears. I found myself telling Elena about Victoria, the betrayal, the divorce. Something I hadn't planned to share, but felt safe sharing with her. Elena listened without judgment and without pity. Told me her own story of a failed engagement to someone who had wanted her money, not her. We recognized in each other that specific kind of woundedness that comes from being valued for the wrong reasons. The relationship developed slowly, both of us cautious, careful, both carrying scars that made us wary of rushing or assuming or believing too easily. But the slowness felt right, felt healthy, felt like building something on a foundation that could actually support weight. Elena insisted on paying for herself on dates, insisted on maintaining her own business and her own finances separate from mine, insisted that if we were going to be together, it would be as equals, not as benefactor and dependent. I appreciated this more than I could express, because it meant she wasn't there for my money, wasn't trying to position herself to take from me, was actually interested in me as a person, rather than as a resource. We spent months getting to know each other, meeting families and friends, integrating into each other's lives gradually and naturally, and I found myself falling in love again, but differently. Falling in love with someone real instead of someone imagined. Falling in love based on understanding and compatibility instead of intensity and fantasy. And it felt more solid, even if less dramatic. Felt like something that could last, because it was built on truth instead of deception. Elena asked me once if I was over Victoria, if I had fully healed from what happened, and I answered honestly, I didn't think you ever fully healed from that kind of betrayal. But you learned to carry the scars without letting them control you. Learn to trust again, even while remembering that trust could be broken. Learn to love again, even while knowing that love could hurt. And Elena said that was the exact right answer. Anyone who claimed to be completely over trauma was either lying or hadn't actually processed it. And my honesty made her trust me more. After a year of dating, Elena and I moved in together. Taking the step carefully, with clear communication about expectations and boundaries. What we both needed to feel safe. Living together revealed new dimensions of our compatibility. Showed that we functioned well as a team in daily life, not just in conversation. That we handled conflict constructively and supported each other's goals genuinely. And made each other better without losing ourselves. I found myself thinking that this was what partnership was supposed to feel like, what marriage was supposed to be. Two people choosing each other every day, not because they needed each other, but because they wanted each other. Not because of what the other person provided, but because of who the other person was. And I realized that what I had with Victoria had never been this. Even in the good times, it had always been performance and transaction dressed up as love. While what I had with Elena was simple and real and strong, precisely because it was built on nothing but genuine affection and respect. We talked about marriage occasionally, both wanting it eventually, but neither feeling rushed. Both understanding that the paper didn't make the commitment, but could formalize and celebrate it when the time was right. And I appreciated that. Elena didn't pressure or hint or manipulate, didn't try to lock me down or secure her position, was simply present and patient and confident that if we were meant to build forever, we would. And if we weren't, then forcing it wouldn't help. 2 years after meeting Elena, I proposed, during a quiet evening at home. No elaborate setup or public display, just the two of us cooking dinner together. And I suddenly felt overwhelmingly certain that I wanted to spend my life with this woman. Wanted to legally bind myself to someone who had proven over and over that she was trustworthy, genuine, and perfect for me in all the ways that mattered. I got down on one knee right there in the kitchen, with flour on my hands. And Elena laughed, tears in her eyes, and said yes before I even finished asking. Said she had been ready whenever I was. Said she loved me, and trusted me, and wanted to build everything with me. The simplicity of that moment was more meaningful to me than all the elaborate planning of my first proposal had been. Because this time, I was proposing to someone I actually knew. Someone who had seen me at my worst and my best, and chose to stay. Someone who loved me for reasons that had nothing to do with what I could provide, and everything to do with who I was. We married 6 months later. In a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Nothing like the elaborate wedding I had had with Victoria, and I preferred it this way. Preferred intimate and meaningful over impressive and expensive. Preferred celebrating with people who genuinely cared over putting on a show for acquaintances and strangers. Standing at the altar, watching Elena walk toward me, I felt peace. Felt certainty. Felt like my life had finally aligned into what it was supposed to be. And I silently thanked my younger self for not giving up after Victoria. For being willing to try again. For having enough faith in the future to remain open to love, even after love had hurt me so badly. Michael and Elena had been married for 3 years. 3 years that were happy, stable, everything a marriage should be. When Richard, my lawyer, called with news, he clearly didn't want to deliver. His voice heavy with something that sounded like reluctance, or maybe dread. Richard asked if I could come to his office. Said it was important but not urgent. Said it concerned Victoria, and I should probably be sitting down when I heard it. My stomach dropped, because I had moved on, built a new life, thought Victoria was firmly in my past. The idea that she was about to intrude again filled me with frustration and worry. I told Elena where I was going, and she offered to come with me for support. But I said this was something I needed to handle alone. Needed to face whatever was coming without dragging her into my past. Elena understood, kissed me, told me she was there if I needed her. I drove to Richard's office, trying to prepare myself for what might be waiting. What news could be important enough to require a meeting, but not urgent enough to share over the phone? Richard's office was familiar. The place where I had planned my divorce strategy years ago. Sitting in that conference room brought back memories I had worked hard to leave behind. Brought back the anger, the hurt, the betrayal I had processed and mostly released. And I didn't like feeling those emotions again, even faintly. Richard came in, carrying a file, looking uncomfortable. He sat down across from me, took a breath, and explained. He had been contacted by a lawyer representing Victoria's estate, which confused me until Richard clarified. Victoria had died 3 weeks ago, found in her mother's apartment, where she had been living. The death was apparently from an overdose of sleeping pills combined with alcohol. Ruled officially as accidental, but everyone involved suspected it was suicide. I felt like I had been punched. All the air left my lungs. My brain struggled to process what Richard was saying. Because whatever I had expected this meeting to be about, it wasn't this. It wasn't Victoria being dead. Wasn't her story ending this way. And despite everything she had done to me, despite all the pain and betrayal, I had never wished this for her. Had never wanted her to be so broken that death seemed like the better option. Richard continued, explaining that Victoria's will left everything she owned to me. Which wasn't much, just some personal belongings and a life insurance policy with a $50,000 payout. But the lawyer said Victoria had left a letter for me as well. A letter written shortly before her death. And the lawyer wanted to know if I wanted to receive it, or if I preferred to decline. To let Victoria's last words remain unread. To maintain the distance and closure I had achieved. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information, trying to understand what I felt. And I realized I felt grief. Genuine grief for Victoria, despite everything. Grief for the waste of potential, and the tragedy of how her life had ended. Grief for the woman she might have been if Harrison had never targeted her. If she had made different choices, if circumstances had been different. And beneath the grief was guilt. Irrational guilt that whispered. Maybe if he had forgiven her, maybe if he had helped her, maybe if he had been different, this wouldn't have happened. Even though my rational mind knew that wasn't true. Knew I wasn't responsible for Victoria's choices or her outcomes. Knew I had protected myself appropriately. I told Richard the first wanted the letter. Wanted to know what Victoria had written. Whatever final communication she had intended for me. Richard pulled an envelope from the file and handed it across the table. I held it, feeling the weight of words I hadn't read yet. Words from beyond death. A voice from someone who no longer existed. I didn't read the letter in Richard's office. I took it home. Waited until evening, when Elena was at a dinner meeting with investors. I needed to be alone for this. Needed space to feel whatever I was going to feel, without worrying about how it affected anyone else. I poured myself a drink, sat in my study, and opened the envelope with hands that shook slightly, pulled out several handwritten pages in Victoria's distinctive script, and I began to read, words that would haunt me in different ways than her betrayal had haunted me. Her words, they were raw, full of regret, explanation, and a desperate plea for understanding. But what they said, what I felt reading them, is a story for another time. What I can tell you now is that it brought a different kind of closure, a heavier one. It made me realize just how tangled life can get, how even the people we think we know best can be pulled into currents we never see. So, here's my question for you. After everything I went through, after being publicly humiliated and financially targeted by someone I loved, do you think I was right to respond the way I did? Or was my revenge too harsh, even considering the betrayal? I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.